The morning of Marcus's wedding unfolded exactly as every family gathering had for the last 5 years, with a phone call from my mother reminding me to dress appropriately and, above all, to avoid disgracing the family. I was in my suite at the Fairmont, glaring at the mustard yellow bridesmaid dress Patricia had so kindly chosen for me when Mom delivered her final pep talk. "Emma, sweetheart, I know this is hard for you," she began, her voice carrying that well-practiced blend of pity and superiority. Being around all of Marcus's successful friends, seeing Patricia's family with their many achievements, just remember that not everyone can be a doctor or a lawyer. "I'll keep that in mind," I said, tugging the zipper up on a dress that transformed me into something between a caution sign and a diseased banana. "And please don't mention your job situation unless someone asks directly. It's Marcus's day, and we don't want people feeling uncomfortable." My job situation, that was the family's polite euphemism now. Not my career, not my work. A situation, like some chronic ailment requiring hushed tones and careful avoidance. In reality, I had built a global logistics empire worth $4.2 billion, employing more than 85,000 people in 47 countries. My company powered supply chains for nearly a third of the Fortune 500, revolutionized cold chain delivery for pharmaceutical giants, and was 3 days away from sealing the largest merger in industry history. But to my family, I was still the girl working at a grocery store. It all began innocently enough. 7 years ago, while overseeing the construction of my first distribution center, I worked the graveyard shift at a Safeway. Midnight to 6 a.m. I scanned barcodes, stocked shelves, and studied customer habits under fluorescent lights. I wanted to understand food retail from the ground up, how goods traveled from supplier to shelf, how inventory flowed, how demand shifted in real time. Most executives relied on consultants and glossy spreadsheets. I relied on sore feet and a price gun. When relatives asked what I was doing back then, I'd answer vaguely, "Food retail," or "supply chain logistics." Somewhere along the way, this morphed into a simpler family legend. Emma works at a grocery store, and once that story cemented itself, there was no rewriting it without sounding either delusional or dishonest. The first time I attempted to clarify, Uncle Richard just patted my shoulder, smiling indulgently. "That's great, honey. It's good you're ambitious about your grocery store job." A few months later, when I proudly mentioned hiring my first 100 employees, Aunt Susan lit up with encouragement. "Oh, are you managing a department now? That's wonderful progress." Eventually, I gave up trying to set the record straight. It was less exhausting to let them cling to their version of reality than to endure the eye rolls and doubt that always followed. A small part of me was even curious. How long could my family sustain their fantasy? The answer, it seemed, was forever. The rehearsal dinner the night before had been especially brutal. Patricia's family weren't just successful. They were the kind of success you could look up in the dictionary. Her father ran a thriving construction empire, her brother had just sold his tech startup for $50 million, and her mother was a federal judge. They were warm, confident, self-assured, people whose very presence suggested Marcus had married into greatness. Naturally, they assumed his family would measure up. "So, Emma," Patricia's brother Jason asked casually over cocktails, "Marcus mentioned you work in food service. Are you planning to open your own restaurant?" Before I could correct him, Marcus jumped in. "Oh no, Emma isn't the entrepreneurial type. She works at a grocery store. It's honest work, though." The silence that followed was razor sharp. Jason smoothed it over with practiced politeness, but I caught the flicker of confusion in his eyes. Patricia's parents exchanged a glance, subtle but unmistakable. I could see the question forming. How did a family of doctors, lawyers, and entrepreneurs end up with me? "Food retail is fascinating," I said evenly. The logistics alone are incredibly complex. I'm sure, Patricia's father replied kindly, already pivoting the conversation toward Marcus's flourishing law practice. Later, by the hotel bar, I overheard Patricia's mother confiding to mine. Patricia mentioned Emma might be a godmother to their children someday, she said, voice careful, measured. Oh, Emma would love that, Mom gushed. She's wonderful with kids. Of course, she's not in a position to be much of a financial influence, but she's very loving. Financial influence? Patricia's mother repeated, the words edged with surprise. Well, you know, she's still finding her way professionally. We help her when we can. Family takes care of family. And besides, your grandchildren will have no shortage of successful role models without worrying about Emma's situation. That was my cue to leave. I slipped away from the bar, retreated to my room, and buried myself in acquisition reports. Anything to remind myself why I'd thought attending this wedding was a good idea. The morning of the ceremony offered no reprieve. While I sat in a makeup chair, the other bridesmaids, Patricia's sister and two of her college friends, chatted breezily about their glittering careers. One was a pediatric surgeon, another was launching her second startup, and the third had already made partner at a consulting firm. And Emma works in grocery, Patricia supplied helpfully when the spotlight turned to me. She's been doing that for years now. Oh, the surgeon replied, her smile tight but polite. That must be stable work. Very stable, I agreed, neglecting to mention that the stability came from managing exclusive contracts with every major food retailer in North America. The conversation quickly veered back to vacation homes in the Hamptons and a month-long tour of Europe. When they asked about my own travel plans, I simply said I hadn't scheduled any. It was easier than explaining I'd be in Singapore next week finalizing a $1.8 billion merger, followed by board meetings in London and a factory opening in Bavaria. The ceremony itself was flawless. Patricia glowed in her grandmother's lace gown, and Marcus looked genuinely overjoyed. I stood at the altar holding her bouquet, forcing myself to focus on their happiness rather than the murmurs I could hear drifting from the pews. Poor Emma, Aunt Susan whispered sympathetically. That color is so unflattering on her. Patricia really should have chosen something better for her complexion. The dress isn't the issue, came the hushed reply. It's the stress. Financial pressure ages you. I kept my smile fixed through it all, even when the photographer carefully positioned me a step behind the other bridesmaids. For composition, he explained. Though everyone understood the real reason, the photos would look cleaner if the family's odd piece didn't draw too much attention. The reception took place in the Fairmont's Grand Ballroom, a space I'd once seriously considered buying, before deciding the location didn't fit my real estate portfolio. It was elegant, dazzling, exactly the sort of room meant for celebration. The dinner was exquisite too, though I hardly tasted a bite as I sat through toast after toast, each one extolling achievements that somehow never included mine. To Patricia's family, Marcus declared, lifting his champagne flute high. To Judge Whitfield, who has dedicated her life to justice. To Jason, who just sold his company for more money than most of us will ever see. To Mr. Whitfield, who built his construction empire from nothing. He pivoted toward our side of the room. And to my family. To Uncle Richard, who just made partner after 20 years of dedication. To Cousin Derek, who opened his second dental practice this year. And to Patricia's maid of honor, Sarah, who saves children's lives as a pediatric surgeon. Then came the pause, the glance that landed squarely on me. And to family members who support us in their own special ways. My sister Emma, who flew all the way from Seattle to be here despite the expense. She works in food service, which is honest, necessary work, and we love her for her dedication to simpler values. The applause was polite, but its edge was unmistakable. heads tilted toward me with that soft, practiced sympathy reserved for recovering addicts or newly single divorcees. It was later, during the dancing, that the real fracture line appeared. I'd stepped outside onto the terrace for air, only to catch a conversation drifting from near the bar. Patricia's mother speaking quietly to Marcus, her voice clipped with concern. "Marcus, I need to ask you something directly," she said. "Is Emma financially stable? I don't mean to pry, but Patricia mentioned she might want Emma to be godmother to your children, and given her circumstances, well, Emma's been struggling for years." Marcus chuckled. "She's sweet, but she can barely take care of herself. She's been stuck in that grocery store job for, 7 years now? Never got promoted, never tried anything new. I just don't think she's built for ambition." Mrs. Whitfield exhaled with visible relief. I was concerned about the influence. Not that there's anything wrong with her work, of course, but Patricia comes from a family of achievers. Her father built his company from nothing. Her brother made $50 million on his startup. We want our grandchildren to have the right kind of role models. "Don't worry about that," Marcus assured her smoothly. "Emma's basically the family charity case. Mom helps her with rent sometimes, and we all pitch in for her car payments. She means well, but she's just not capable of more than she's doing now." That wasn't true. I had never once asked for, nor accepted, financial help from anyone in my family. But that was the narrative they clung to, the fiction that made my deliberately modest lifestyle more palatable to their egos. I was about to head back inside when Derek's voice carried around the corner, smug and unmistakable. He was holding court with a cluster of Patricia's relatives. "Did you see Emma's car in the lot?" he said with a laugh. "It's like 15 years old. I actually felt embarrassed when the valet had to figure out how to start it." Marcus mentioned she's been using food stamps. One of Patricia's cousins chimed in, voice lowered in faux sympathy. "I just thought it was sad." "It is sad," Derek agreed quickly, eager to pile on. "The whole family's successful except her," he continued. "My mom thinks she probably has some undiagnosed learning disability. How else do you explain someone working the same entry-level job for 7 years?" "At least she seems happy," the cousin offered charitably. "I guess ignorance is bliss." "Exactly," Derek replied, chuckling. "She has no idea how far behind she's fallen." That was enough. I slipped my phone from my clutch and typed a single line to David, my head of security. "Pick up. Now." His reply came seconds later. "ETA 10 minutes. Helicopter fueled and ready." I exhaled slowly, then turned toward the ballroom. The plan was simple. Say quick goodbyes, leave gracefully, and let the evening collapse in on itself without me. But before I could retreat into anonymity, Marcus's voice rang out, his champagne glass tapping against silver. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, smiling at the crowd, "Patricia and I want to thank you all for being here tonight. We're so grateful to be surrounded by such successful, accomplished people. Our families represent the very best of what hard work and ambition can achieve." He swept his hand theatrically around the room. "We have entrepreneurs who've built million-dollar companies, doctors saving lives, lawyers fighting for justice, executives running major corporations, people who've taken risks, pushed boundaries, refused to settle for anything less than excellence." His eyes found mine across the room, and there was something almost pitying in the way he held the pause. "But we're also grateful for family members who contribute in simpler ways," Marcus went on. "My sister Emma flew all the way from Seattle to be here tonight, even though I know the cost was probably difficult for her budget. She works in food service, which is honest, humble work. Not everyone can be a CEO or a surgeon, and that's perfectly okay." The applause that followed was polite, but heavy with condescension. Faces turned toward me with the strained smiles usually reserved for someone disclosing a terminal illness. "Emma represents something important," Marcus continued, his voice taking on the cadence of a sermon. In a world obsessed with achievement and status, she reminds us that there's dignity in simple work, value in modest goals. She's content with her life, and that's actually quite admirable. Patricia's father, buoyed by several glasses of wine and a misplaced sense of magnanimity, pushed back his chair and stood. "To Emma," he proclaimed, lifting his glass high, "for showing us that happiness doesn't require success." The room followed, glasses raised, their eyes fixed on me with a blend of pity and relief, the unspoken gratitude that their own children had not suffered my supposed fate. I had become, in that instant, an object lesson, a cautionary tale, a living motivational poster about accepting your limitations. That's when my phone buzzed. "Miss Anderson." The voice came from just behind me. I turned to find a tall man in a flawless black suit, who seemed to have materialized out of thin air. David Martinez, former Secret Service, now head of my personal security detail, looked exactly like what he was, a professional trained to neutralize threats against world leaders, currently tasked with guarding one of Seattle's most valuable executives. "I'm David Martinez, your head of security," he continued, his voice pitched just loudly enough for the nearest tables to catch every word. "I apologize for the interruption, but we have an urgent situation requiring your immediate attention." The room fell silent. David radiated authority. 6 feet, 2 inches of calm vigilance wrapped in a perfectly tailored suit. "Security?" Mrs. Whitfield echoed, blinking in confusion. "The helicopter is waiting on the roof," David said smoothly. "Your 9:00 p.m. conference call with the Singapore team cannot be delayed. The Chin Industries merger closes Monday morning, and the Tokyo markets open in 3 hours. The board is waiting for your final approval on the $1.8 billion acquisition." Marcus's champagne glass slipped from his hand, shattering against the marble floor. "I'm sorry to cut this short," I said, rising and smoothing down the hideous mustard dress Patricia had chosen for me. "I try to keep business separate from family time, but unfortunately, international markets don't respect wedding schedules." "Emma, what the hell is going on?" Marcus demanded, grabbing my arm, his voice breaking on the words. David stepped in, calm but unmistakably firm. "Sir, I'll need you to step back from Miss Anderson." "Miss Anderson?" Patricia's whisper cut through the silence. I looked around at the faces fixed on me. The same faces that had spent the night dissecting my supposed failures, their pity now frozen into shock. "I suppose I should explain," I said evenly. "My name is Emma Anderson, and I'm the founder and CEO of Anderson Global Logistics. We're the largest privately held supply chain management company in North America, operating in 47 countries with annual revenues of $4.2 billion. The grocery store job Marcus mentioned?" I let the pause hang. That's how I started. I saw jaws slacken as I went on. "I worked nights at Safeway for 3 years while building my first distribution center during the day. I wanted to understand food retail from the ground up, customer behavior, inventory systems, supply chain flow, employee dynamics. Most executives learn from consultants and spreadsheets. I learned by scanning barcodes and stocking shelves." Derek's face had gone sheet white. "We handle distribution for about 30% of the Fortune 500, I continued, my voice steady. "Walmart, Target, Kroger, Safeway. If you've bought groceries in the last 5 years, there's a good chance our systems got that food from farm to shelf. We revolutionized cold chain logistics for pharmaceutical companies, built the algorithms Amazon uses for its grocery division, and designed the inventory systems running most major retailers today." Mrs. Whitfield was staring at me as though I'd just confessed to being from another planet. Your company?" "Forbes ranked me 47th on their list of richest self-made women," I said lightly. "Though I prefer to focus on the 85,000 employees worldwide and the fact that we've been carbon neutral for 3 years. Patricia found her voice first. Marcus, you said she worked at a grocery store. She does, Marcus stammered, as if the words were crumbling in his mouth. She told me she worked in food retail. Food retail logistics, I corrected gently. I oversee supply chains for every major grocery chain in North America, plus expanding networks in Europe and Asia. When I said I worked in food retail, I meant that I was transforming the way food moves from producers to consumers. Uncle Richard stared down at his bourbon glass, as if it might whisper some explanation. The resume help you offered was very thoughtful, I said. Though my current position seems to be working out. David glanced at his watch. Ms. Anderson, we really do need to go. The Singapore call is critical. Chin Industries won't wait. If we miss this window, the merger collapses. 18,000 jobs on the line. Of course. I turned back to Marcus and Patricia. Congratulations again on your wedding. It truly was beautiful. I wish you both every happiness. Wait. Marcus grabbed for my arm again, then immediately released it when David shifted his weight. The smallest reminder that touching me wasn't advisable. His voice cracked. Emma, I don't understand. Why didn't you tell us? Tell you what? I asked. That I was successful? Would it have mattered? Of course it would have mattered, Marcus blurted. Really? My gaze swept the room, taking in every face that had smiled politely at my supposed failures all night. Because from what I overheard tonight, you were all perfectly comfortable with your version of me, the family charity case, the sister who needed financial help, the one with a supposed learning disability too limited for real achievement. We never said you were learning disabled, Derek protested weakly. You literally said that 20 minutes ago on the terrace, I shot back. Along with speculating about my food stamp usage and expressing embarrassment over my car. Patricia's father was still staring at me, his jaw slack. You actually run a billion-dollar company? She's on the Forbes list, someone whispered from the back. One of the younger cousins held up her phone, screen glowing. Emma Anderson, CEO of Anderson Global Logistics. Net worth estimated at $2.3 billion. The murmur that rippled through the room was like a row of dominoes collapsing. Shock, disbelief, recalculation spreading from table to table. This doesn't make sense, Aunt Susan blurted, her tone almost accusatory. If you're so wealthy, why do you dress so modestly? Why do you drive an old car? Why live like a normal person? Because money isn't the most important thing in life, I said evenly. I thought family was. I thought showing up for the people you love mattered more than showing off your bank account. I thought humility was still a virtue. Marcus was shaking his head, bewildered. But you let us think you were struggling. I didn't let you think anything, Marcus. You assumed. All of you did. You decided that because I didn't brag about my accomplishments at every holiday dinner, I must not have any. You built an entire narrative about my life, complete with financial problems I don't have and limitations I've never shown, without ever asking me a single direct question about what I actually do. But you said you worked in food retail, Patricia protested, her voice thin with disbelief. I said I worked in food retail logistics, I corrected calmly. When I mentioned supply chain management, you smiled politely and changed the subject. When I talked about hiring employees, you assumed I meant managing a grocery store department. And when I said I traveled for business, you pictured training sessions at other locations. The room was utterly silent now, the weight of their assumptions pressing down on every face. You know what's funny? I said. 3 years ago, when I missed Christmas, you all decided it was because I couldn't afford the plane ticket. The truth? I was in Tokyo, personally negotiating a contract that brought 2,000 manufacturing jobs back to the United States. Last year, when I couldn't make Derek's wedding, You assumed I was working extra shifts to make rent. In reality, I was in Germany opening a facility that now employs 1,500 people. Derek looked like he might be sick. Miss Anderson, David prompted gently. The helicopter. I nodded. I really do have to go. Singapore doesn't wait. And there are a lot of people depending on this deal closing successfully. As I moved toward the exit, the crowd shifted instinctively, parting around me like I was visiting royalty. The same people who'd pitied me minutes ago now stared with wide eyes, some in awe, some in confusion, most in embarrassment. At the door, I turned once more. For what it's worth, Marcus, I hope you and Patricia are very happy together. Marriage should be about loving someone as they are, not as you assume they should be. Maybe that's something worth remembering. The elevator ride to the roof was silent, save for the faint jazz drifting through the speakers. David held the door as we stepped onto the helipad, where my pilot waited with the rotors already thundering. How was the wedding, ma'am? David asked, raising his voice over the noise as he helped me into the cabin. Educational, I said, buckling my seatbelt and slipping on the headset. As the helicopter lifted, I glanced down to see clusters of guests spilling onto the hotel terraces, staring upward in bewilderment. My phone buzzed nonstop. Marcus, Derek, Aunt Susan, unknown numbers, but I powered it down and turned to the city lights below. Tomorrow would bring supply chains, board meetings, and the 1,000 decisions that kept a global company humming. Tonight had reminded me why I'd drawn such a hard line between family and business. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop hiding. Perhaps the people who truly mattered would love me anyway. And the ones who didn't? Their approval had never been worth chasing. Singapore, ma'am? The pilot asked through the headset. Actually, I said, glancing down at the dress. Let's stop at the office first. I want to change. This thing is awful, and I suspect the Singapore meeting will be photographed. David smirked. Told you mustard yellow wasn't your color. For the first time that day, I laughed. As Seattle's skyline rose ahead of us, I realized tomorrow's business pages would likely mention Anderson Global's CEO making a dramatic helicopter exit from a family wedding. My PR team would field calls, spin stories, dampen speculation. But tonight? Tonight I felt lighter than I had in years. I'd spent so much energy trying to be humble that I'd forgotten the difference between humility and invisibility. Maybe it was time to stop fading into the background. After all, Anderson Global hadn't revolutionized supply chain management by staying quiet and hoping someone noticed.